and welcome to part 5 of SE 310 Innoslate tutorials. I'm Lieutenant Lou, and today I'll be taking you through allocation to assets. So if you remember where we left off from our last tutorial, we built FFBDs made up of a bunch of actions in order to satisfy the requirements that we loaded in, and those requirements all came from our source documents that were generated with our customers or stakeholders. So, from the functions that we have determined our system needs to perform for SE310, that would be your Euchre system, and any capstoners watching this, that would be whatever your capstone design requires. The next step of the systems engineering process is to look at those functions and determine what components in your system design can perform those functions. So that's what allocation to assets is about, is allocating these functions that make up your system functions and allocating those to components of your system. So for Euchres, that's oftentimes going to be an actual physical component. Innoslate calls it an asset. It can also just as very well be any sort of software component that is part of your system design. Now let's go through building up components for our system design in Innoslate. So to do that, go to Diagrams, New Diagram, and we're going to want an asset diagram. And I'm just going to number this 1. I'm going to name it Gym System Asset Diagram and give a brief description. Okay, so here's my description. Click Next, and it'll tell you congratulations. Okay, so this is what your interface for building an asset hierarchy is going to look like. So let's go ahead and build this asset hierarchy. So to do that, let's just click and drag this asset over onto our screen right here, and I'm going to number it 1, and this asset is going to represent our entire system, so that'll be the gym system. Okay, so we have our first tier of our hierarchy. It's just the gym system, and now we're going to move on to the next level to model our subsystems. So if it were you, then you would go ahead and keep adding these assets onto your diagram. For simplicity's sake, I already have these subsystems created in my database. So I'm just going to start clicking and dragging them onto my diagram so that you can see what a hierarchy is going to look like. So since we have 1, which is our gym system, I'm going to take exercise equipment, which is 1.1, and throw it onto the second level. I don't want to number it 2. There we go. And just keep repeating for all of my subsystems. There's 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, Okay, so there are the subsystems for my system, and let's go ahead and connect these subsystems to our top of our hierarchy. So to do that, let's click on 1 and click on this green button over here, you'll see a little cross pop up, and you'll be able to click and drag from that onto your subsystem level. Okay, you don't really need a name for this link, but we can edit where we want this link to be and just keep repeating that. Okay, so here we have our system level, we have our subsystems, and I'm going to go ahead and show you the next level of my asset hierarchy, which is going to be the component level. So let's break down a couple of these subsystems. Let's see here. In exercise equipment, we have cardio machines as well as free weight equipment. So let's go ahead and add those. Looks like that Innoslate is trying to renumber them, but we want to keep our numbering system consistent. This is 1.1, so all of the components that are stemming from this subsystem are going to start with 1.1. So this will be 1.1.2. And so on, and I'll do the same thing and connect these. All right, now that you kind of get an idea of what an asset hierarchy is gonna look like, just keep in mind that, especially for the people who are building a Euchre system, it's probably going to be a good bit more complex when you're modeling your entire system. And let's just say that you've decided this is a good stopping point, and we can click Save. And now our asset diagram will be over here in our diagrams. So one thing that we need to make sure as we're going through generating our system in Innoslate is to maintain traceability. In the same way that we link traceability between our functions and our requirements, you want to do the same thing with your functions and your assets now. So the way that we're going to do this is, let's go to Database. And you can see here, look at your actions over here on the left pane. And these are the actions that I have so far. You're probably going to have a lot more. And let's just look at this action right here. 1.1, provide exercise equipment. Let's click on it and open it to Entity View. And so now if you look over here on the relationships pane, let's go over to all. You can see that we have a decomposes relationships with, and we want to look at that this function is being performed by an asset. So remember, we are looking at this function of providing exercise equipment. And we know now that that function is going to be performed by our asset exercise equipment. So let's add that traceability. And here we have it here. This is 1.1 exercise equipment, and that is the asset that performs this function. Now let's make sure that you can see over here, we have the traceability between this function and the requirement. and that this function is satisfying our requirement R1 of providing exercise equipment. And once you're happy with that traceability, click Save. And make sure to do this with all of your functions or actions, as Innoslate calls them, and your assets in the same way that you would make sure to have traceability between all of your requirements and all of your functions. So the last thing that we're going to touch on when it comes to allocation to assets in this tutorial is partitioning. So partitioning is grouping different functions of your system together that are all performed by the same component. So let's give an example of what that is. So let's look at our action diagram, or actually let's look at our asset diagram first. So you can see this is what we have modeled of the components and subsystems in our gym, and one of those is 1.4, the computer system. So let's go back to our diagrams, and if we click on the action diagram for our main system, the gym, we can see that over here we have two functions, 1.4 and 1.5, which is logging the resident discount and registering clients. Now both of those functions are going to be performed by the same component, which is our gym computer system. So the way that we're going to partition this FFBD is let's group these two functions together and let's give them a color coding. So let's just make these yellow. It's easy enough to see. Okay, so now these two are grouped together by color, and let's click Save. And now if we go back to our asset diagram, we're going to want to keep the same color coding system between all of our diagrams. So since these two functions, 1.4 and 1.5, are both being performed by our computer system over here, we're going to make that asset or component, or component in this case, the same color. So let's make it yellow. All right, click Save. And as you can see now, these functions have been partitioned and they have been allocated to this asset over here.